we'll go ahead and get started. Is that on?
Yeah.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, and I'm sure you do because you probably found out about this on social media, I'm Dr. Beau of the farm, of course. I am not a runner by upbringing by any means. I was a football player, your middle American kid, you know, heart and soul, played baseball, basketball, football. I did track, but I did all short distance events. I guess I was kind of a runner, but 100, 400, 800, and that was all really just cross training for football. Sophomore year of high school, they made us pick a sport, and I had to go with football, so they made us dump everything. From that, went on to play football all the way through high school up to college. I always considered a mile to be torture, so anything longer than that, I absolutely avoided like the plague. But I obviously wasn't good enough to play football for the rest of my life, so once I graduated, I didn't want to basically get out of shape, so I started running. And I moved up to Alaska and was staying with my sister, and she was trying to get back in shape. She's like, I want you to run a 5K with me. So we signed up for this Bear Paw 5K. And I go out and run that thing, and I think I'm doing really well, and I'm passing people. In the last half mile, mom with like a 2-year-old and a trike stroller passes me in the last half mile. And it was at that moment, if anybody knows me, I'm a little bit compulsive about things. I was like, I'm training for running this, I will never lose like that again. So I just went crazy. I think there was an 8-year-old kid that passed me too, but whatever. So I went crazy with it and just started reading, learning everything I could about running, entering races. I was really lucky to live in really cool places like Telluride in Alaska and run mountains and trails. So I got really spoiled, but I also got to be around a lot of great runners and train in a lot of great places. And then that kind of what brings me to where I'm at today. And now I get to work in a clinic where I work with primarily runners and golfers, or two big athlete spectrums. Getting to coach for the Navy now with the Wounded Warrior Project as a track and field coach, so I'm getting to apply kind of my general base of knowledge multiple ways, which is really cool for me. So that's kind of my story, how I got to running and why you're here listening to me, and I appreciate everybody coming and listening. Selfishly, I had to take tonight's clinic and break it into 3 clinics because I'm a little long-winded. But besides that, we all know that you could talk about running for literally days, maybe a week on end. I mean, there's conferences all the time bringing up new things about running. But for our purpose, I broke it into everything below the knee tonight. So we're going to go over mechanics of ankle, foot, a little bit of knee, all that fun stuff. Next one coming up on March 18th will be hip core complex. And then after that, it'll go more into training protocol, warm-up, nutrition, hydration. So we're going to try to hit a couple different facets of this, just because it wasn't fair to everybody that's trying to get the most out of this, and I don't feel like I can get as detailed if I try to hit everything in an hour and still get you out of here to get to your families. So it's broken up, and that's why I want to make sure that everybody is aware, so they're not like, I didn't want to just learn about the ankle, I want to learn how to run faster. Well, you got to start somewhere, right? Okay, so first question, is there a right way to run? And this is kind of a fun question, right? Running is kind of an innate human ability, right? It's you're a kid, you learn how to crawl, you learn how to walk, and instantaneously you want to chase something, you learn how to run. Nobody really taught you how to run. A lot of theories behind kind of neurodevelopmental models and things like that of how we develop movement patterns. I'm not here to talk about all that nerdy stuff, a little bit of it maybe. But running is hotly debated. It's just funny that it is because it's so natural, right? But I mean, tons of techniques. And when I ask this question, I say, is there a right way to run? And then we look at a picture like this, which is our fun little Olympic athlete spectrum. There's no way that you can tell me that every one of these people is going to run the same. Now, are the general mechanics the same? Yeah, I would hope so. And I really correlate it to golf. The best minds in golf right now, in my opinion, kind of think that there's a million different swings for a million different people. You can't just say, this is the way you should run. You're going to put everybody into this funnel, and out the back end, here comes this perfect runner. You have to take into account body type, body shape, previous injury, mobility, stability, neurologic development. All of those things have to go into the picture, and that's where it's really hard to be a good coach, a good practitioner, a good runner sometimes, because you get so much information. And I really believe by coming to little talks like this and educating yourself, you get a better filter. So as all that stuff comes at you, you're just able to process it and say, I'm going to set that to the side, or I'm going to analyze that a bit instead of just taking things at face value and say, I'm going to apply this. I don't know why, but I'm going to apply it. So I'm all about education. If you learn a lot, you'll be able to take things, break it down, make it work for you, or throw it away. Okay, So now, move on from is there a correct way to run? Is running a sport, a skill, or a movement? And I have to give Kyle Putman kind of credit for this, for bringing my attention to this. He always asks our athletes in our introductory meeting at the Navy that is running a sport? And of course, they're like, oh yeah, you know, track and field, all this stuff. Running is not a sport if you look at the classification, it's an athletic. So your athletics and field events are really track and field. It's kind of a misnomer. Now, we know it's a movement, 100%. Now, is it a skill? Is it something that you should be working on? Is there technique? Is there coaching that applies to it? Well, absolutely. We can see by all these people that have developed these, you know, different techniques and coaching styles that have made millions of dollars and sold books and wrote articles. Obviously, again, it's debated, it's coached, it's something that we analyze and constantly reanalyze and teach. And there are good things about each one of these techniques, and it's not that we should throw away one or completely religiously abide by another. But again, I want you to be able to analyze better by gathering information and filtering it. Kind of where my talk's going to go tonight, and this is kind of anything. When we talk about, this is a performance running clinic, right? So this isn't heal your injuries, this isn't pose running method. We're talking about running economy from a standpoint of increasing running economy or efficiency in a runner. And when you do that, you have to look at three different things, and that's metabolic economy, neural economy or neurologic kind of awareness, ability, and then biomechanical, which we're going to really look at tonight because it's everything below the knee as far as mechanics go. So these three parts add up to total running economy, which running economy isn't the end-all be-all to performance running, but it is an awful big part, especially I tailor this more to distance runners because that's typically who you're going to see in an off like ours, because chronic overuse injuries, your weekend warriors, not everybody's going out and sprinting a 100 or a 400 is their sport of choice. There's not a lot of those unless you're in the elder games. So we're going to focus on biomechanics and movement, and my kind of precursor to anything mechanical dealing with running, and we're going to touch on one of these tonight, it has to include this if you're going to try to touch performance with a stick. So if your breathing is not maximized and at least correct, you need to work on it, you need to have it assessed, but there's always room for improvement in breathing. That's something that can always be better because we live in a society that is making us more flexion dominant, more immobile. So all these things feed a bad breathing pattern. We're not going to talk about this tonight because we're going to talk about that in the next one. But I want to cover these three things that you have to be working on if you want to be a better runner. One that we will talk about a lot tonight is dorsiflexion. If you don't know what dorsiflexion is, we'll go over that. Huge, huge, huge issue. And the last one would be hip extension, which we talk a lot about, like the glutes and turning the glutes on. If you saw Tiger Woods, I couldn't activate my glutes, which caught a lot of flack for that little statement. There's a lot to hip extension and hip drive that gets really messed up by doing this all day, or texting, or sitting on a computer, or a lot of other things. So these are the big three in my mind that could always be worked on for the rest of your life, as long as we live our North American society like we do right now. If we're going to talk about biomechanics, we have to kind of go over a little bit of this nerdy talk. So this is kind of the stable mobile alternating pattern developed by Gray Cook. He kind of popularized that. All this kind of points out is that when we look at the human body, if we start at the foot, that's going to be a stable joint, and then the ankle's mobile, the knee's stable, the hip's mobile, low back's stable, and it just goes up the kinetic chain like that. If we disregard this model, we really start to see a breakdown in mechanics. Or if something goes wrong in this model, we see a breakdown in mechanics. And the most common one in my mind, even though it's not ankle and foot driven, is hips and low back. We see really kind of immobile hips and a really kind of hypermobile lumbar spine cause a ton of issues. So that's probably the most common, but we're talking about ankle and feet. But this is just something really good to know, because sometimes, and I just use this as an example, we see people putting a foam roll in a lumbar spine and just getting, ooh, look at all this extension. Maybe you don't want to do that. And those are the things that you have to know first. You have to be educated to even ask yourselves those questions, right? So if you just say, I'm going to foam roll everything because I love foam rolling, maybe you shouldn't foam roll everything. So foot and ankle. Foot and ankle, the reason we can talk about it for an hour is because it consists of a lot of things. 26 bones, 33 joints, over 10% of the bones in your body, 100 plus muscles, tendons, and ligaments, 37,000 free nerve endings. So you have about 300,000 something free nerve endings in your body. So again, a ton of free nerve endings in the feet. which correlates to something we call proprioception, which is kind of position sense. So you get a lot of kind of reaction and feel and feedback through your feet, and we really mess that up in a lot of really good ways. We're really clever at making ourselves use our feet poorly, and we'll talk about that here pretty quick. I said it's everything below the knee. Here we see a really fancy picture of your knee. I'm not going to talk about the knee at all. In my opinion, the knee is the little brother. The knee is the one getting beat up by the hip and the ankle and the foot. The knee is the driver. If you saw in there, it's supposed to be a stable joint in between these two mobile joints of the hip and the ankle. The knee gets a ton of injuries correlated with it, right? You know, patellofemoral syndrome, runner's knee, IT band syndrome, we got the whole laundry list. Got all these injuries, but if you don't look up and downstream from the knee, you're never going to get to the root cause, in my opinion. You could go in there and foam roll and do all, and think about how hard it is to actually work on the knee yourself. That kind of gives you a clue. You know, can you go in there and foam roll your meniscus or, you know, do it? No, you can't. And what are the drivers for that? And again, you have to know how to ask these questions, and I think this is fully something that everybody can do. In my opinion, you should be able to take care of 85 to 90% of injuries or prehab, rehab on your own. Probably really bad business advice from me, but that's the truth of the matter, and that's why we do clinics like this. So yeah, that's your knee. So how do we get here? This foot, to me, is not a good-looking foot. Maybe you think it looks fine. To me, it looks like a sack of meat. I don't see a foot there, but this is becoming more and more common. This is really bad. This is what my grandma's feet look like, but at least she bedazzled it with a little toe ring. But these feet, I mean, we do this to ourselves, and we don't get near enough of this. And I'm not here to teach a barefoot running clinic. I'm not Barefoot Ted. I'm not, you know, we're not going to go all Christopher McDougall on you. But this is, we have those nerve endings in the bottom of our feet for a reason, and we rob ourselves of that, and we stick ourselves in shoes, and we go pound the pavement for, you know, hundreds of miles a week. We do a lot of damage, so you got to know how to take care of yourself to offset those things if we're going to keep doing that, because the truth of the matter is we are, right? We're here to run. We're not going to go run barefoot down the road tomorrow just because we, you know, say, I got all these nerve endings and I should be getting these foot mechanics right. So you got to know how to take care of yourselves, and that's what it comes down to. I don't know why you have a headlight on your Tevas, but the whole reason I have this picture up here, we're going to talk about footwear for just a second, because everybody always wants to talk about footwear. I honestly used to, I'll admit this, I used to say footwear didn't matter, but like 2 to 3% of the equation. I would say it does, but always in the negative. You should never, ever, ever, ever look to a shoe to correct something. I would never put a dysfunctional foot in an orthotic. I would never put a dysfunctional foot in a shoe trying to correct stability or mobility or anything like that. And we'll talk more about that. But I put flip-flops on here because if you're an athlete, you should not wear a flip-flop. To wear a flip-flop, you literally have to grip the flip-flop as you go into kind of swing phase or toe off. You then have to stop plantar flexion short to come back into dorsiflexion, make that flip-flop doesn't fall off your feet. And then let's say I put in 10,000 steps a day if I'm a busy man or woman. That's a lot of dysfunctional movement going on. And then I'm going to go work all day, walk around in my flip-flops, which if you can wear flip-flops to work, you probably don't really care how you run anyways, but that's, you know, more power to you. But if I expect to go run at a really high level after that, it's not going to happen. I mean, or it could happen, but it's a matter of time before you get hurt or something falls off the wheels.
Chacos?
Chacos are a little bit better because they have something around the heel. So you're not asking your foot to be your support system, you have a support system on the shoe. So that's a good point. Chacos are a whole other thing though. They're a very rigid platform shoe with an arch support in them. So it's basically like a false orthotic in some ways. And you feel free to ask questions. This is much more fun if it's a conversation rather than a lecture. So feel free to ask some questions. I don't know how tall these heels are, but they're too tall. And any heel's really too tall. I can't imagine wearing those all day. And if you're a guy wearing those all day, that's a whole other question. But high heels are absolutely horrible. I call this the contradictory statement to the foot. So now we have the toes in full dorsiflexion. We have the ankle almost in full plantar flexion. Now I'm going to pull my hips into full anterior tilt and then have to recorrect the center of my gravity. You want to talk about just something that's just crazy? And I don't know about you, but a lot of the women I see walk around these look like a drunk deer. I mean, this cannot be good for ankle stability overall. So not a great thing to do. These are still high heels, but these are kind of fun. So I would actually suggest these. Nike, you got to bring Nike if you're going to talk about running. They kind of popularized the modern running shoe. It's gotten better, worse, all over the place, since the late 60s, early 70s. This obviously isn't really a running shoe, it's a cross trainer. I put this on here just to show you kind of that elevated heel that we talk about. So when we sit in an elevated heel shoe over 4 to 6 millimeters and we go walk, we run, we train, we lift weights, we really start to adapt to that. So our heel cord, our whole posterior chain starts to shorten because we're literally in a mini high heel. So we're no better than the drunken deer, right? We're just walking around these little platforms, getting our Achilles to accommodate to a shortened position, and then I'm going to go do something like maybe I'm going to, I take a step in basketball or I do a box jump and man, there goes my Achilles, or whatever injury, you go down the trail and you're bombing down a downhill and all of a sudden there goes the Achilles or there goes the ankle. Well, a lot of that's mechanically set up by what we're wearing all day. Not to mention that shoes, just shoes in general, they're getting better with the ultras and different kind of foot conforming shoes. You see a lot of shoes that are not made to conform to a foot. Your foot conforms to the shoe. Does that kind of make sense? And I'm guilty of this too. I just ordered a pair of shoes, didn't try them on, got them offline, we get some trail shoes. It's like shoving my foot into a canoe. I mean, that thing is so narrow. There's no way that's good for me. Right? I should throw them away, but probably not. I'm just as guilty as everybody else. You want to take it to like the Nike shoe on steroids, your fun little Hokas. Oh, you got your Hokas on up front. All right. Okay. So I work with a lot of trail runners, and they love their Hokas. Run around these little pillows of happiness. Hokas literally are a minimalist shoe, believe it or not, right? The drop is between 6 to 4 millimeters on most Hokas. Thing is, they have about 20 millimeters of EVA that's very compressible underneath of it. We always say soft shoe, soft body. If you got all those nerve endings in the bottom of your foot and you ask your foot to hit the ground and it's got 20 millimeters of compression before it gets to realize what's happening underneath of it, if you don't think your reaction time, your ankle stability, and therefore your knee and your hip stability is compromised, you might want to rethink that a little bit.
Well, what about the balance between like the comfort
of having to run a 100-mile race?
Right, of having that cushion, so that you're not beating yourself, because when you're doing long runs, that pounding.
Right.
And if you can alleviate some of that with some cushion.
So this one,
in your
I
shoe.
will bring up a bit of the barefoot argument. So the whole, we'll talk about this in a second. I think it's the next one actually. The whole reason the barefoot movement got started is they started doing a lot of studies out of Harvard. The Army started doing studies where they looked at foot strike and they looked at how the body adapts and kind of the load dampening effect of running forefoot, midfoot, all those fun things. What we see when we run in a minimalist shoe or barefoot, that we actually will be self-limiting. Our knees and our hips or our feet will start to hurt first because we're actually running on concrete, we're running with proper mechanics, but we're not able to run as long because we're not giving ourselves cushion. So the other side of the argument is if I put myself in cushion and I don't have perfect mechanics, I'm probably tearing myself up. I'm just able to do it for a much longer period of time. And then at that point you just ask which one's crazier, to wear giant pillows of happiness or run 100 miles. They're both crazy. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not telling anybody not to do anything. Go around 100 miles, I might do one day. So at the end of the day, a 100-mile run is not good for you. So yeah, strap some, big old cushions on your feet so you can get through it. You're trying to give yourself a fighting advantage at that point, in my opinion. But mechanically, if we're talking about, and that's what this is about, not the pose method, the Newton method, it's the most biomechanically sound method to get the best force production on your body. It would not happen with something like a Hoka.
So maybe train in some different shoes and wear your Hokas, put them on at mile 50.
Yeah, and that's a good point because the other thing that's going to happen, let's say you've never run a 50-mile race. You've run a marathon and you've done some training and everybody says, oh, if you can run a marathon, you run a 50-miler. So you've never adapted to the amount of fatigue and the amount of kind of mechanical breakdown that's going to occur. And it would occur in your race anyways, right? Because you're going to go out faster than your training. I mean, research is going to show that, so your mechanics are going to break down faster. If you've never accommodated to a lower profile shoe, yeah, you might want to throw something in your bag so your mechanics go off the rail. It's just, that is a crutch at that point. And so long as you know it's a crutch and it's not like your savior, you know what I mean? Like I can put on a Hoka, I can put on a stability shoe later in the race because I know my mechanics go out the window. Good, but you're going to find problems up the chain. The foot will survive, but will the knee, will the hip, will the low back? That's my point, that you're driving forces up the body that wouldn't really be there. So that's kind of where we go with that. And that's, I mean, you can go either way, right? I'm not saying that there's right way or wrong way, I'm just giving you info. The whole minimalist running, you know, Born to Run, it's a great book, and we saw all these kind of Luna sandals come out of this, and we saw the horrendous situation that, you know, Vibram went through, which is really crazy when you think about it, because Vibram did make claims, but their claims were actually right. It's just they went a little too far, right? They tried to say they were going to fix stuff, and what did I just say? Don't ever look to a shoe to fix stuff. Can it train you to do different things and make you adapt to a more minimalist lifestyle? Yeah, but if you strap these suckers on and go run a race and you get hurt, or it didn't fix your plantar fasciitis or something like that, yeah, you gotta, you know, we're very litigious, so it's bad that it happened to him like that, but there are good things to everything. Now, I've got the all-powerful kind of healing apparatus right here for plantar fasciitis, the Strasbourg sock. I put this up here with orthotics because, I mean, not that I'm a hypocrite, we use orthotics. There's a time and a place. I would never put, like I said, a dysfunctional foot in an orthotic. We try to get maximum function. If there's still something left at the end, or there's so much damage, say ruptured plantar fascia, or you know, surgical release of the plantar fascia, something like that, you might need orthotic support. Same thing with like things like a, you know, Strasbourg sock, or sticking somebody in different kind of boots for too long, or whatever it is. There's time and place for everything, but there's also a time and place to realize when you shouldn't be doing that, and you actually do need to move or think about changing something. Because a lot of times we're guilty as runners, and everybody, if you don't admit this, we should just make everybody raise their hand. You run through pain, you know you're injured, and you probably should stop, but you're not going to stop. So you do need some of this stuff at the end of the day, right? But I'm just saying it's not the best. Like, look at your shoes, look at your mechanics, you know, everything. Everything's got to be analyzed if you want to keep running for the rest of your life, especially if you want to run really well. Okay, so how we're going to wrap up the shoe debate here. This was one of the military studies that kind of looked at how shoes affected feet. Injury rates, different injuries going into a shoe, what injuries came out of an injury-free runner when they ran in certain types of shoes. We really looked at everything. It came down to comfort. The best results came down to a comfortable shoe. Didn't matter about heel rise, didn't matter about, you know, height of anything. Amount of cushion, minimal, Hoka, came out of this. So what's that say? Don't try to fit your foot in a canoe like I did. I should go get something that actually feels good. So don't buy your shoes online, or if you do, go try them in a store first. Nobody likes an Amazon shopper, right? They'll chase you around in Best Buy, so you gotta watch out for that. So we showed pictures of bad feet earlier. We don't need to tell what bad feet really are if we describe good feet. Good feet, not a great description, but when we talk about good feet, first thing we bring up is the arch support. So everybody knows what the medial arch of your foot is, right? So it's that arch that you think about. You actually have three arches. You have the transverse arch that runs along the base of your toes. You have the lateral longitudinal arch, which goes from the base of your pinky toe back to your heel, and then the medial longitudinal arch, which is the arch that we think of. Those three things together create kind of a tripod support system between the outside of your foot, the ball of your foot, and your heel. Now that is not a weight-bearing structure. I will debate anybody on this. This is not weight-bearing. This is really like a reflex recoil system. So you have tendons that kind of slide under that arch. Adequate active and passive range of motion. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. We're going to go to that right after this. You have to have certain range of motions at multiple joints across the body to make any athletic move happen, especially running. If you're missing a certain amount of range of motion or can't control that range of motion, we go back to that stability mobility model of alternating patterns. You're going to start affecting that, which is going to lead to dysfunction, which ultimately leads to pain, which leads to an injury. Last would be neurologic control. So you can have all the mobility and stability in the world. If you can't turn it on at the right time and in the right amount and the right fashion, it doesn't mean anything. And I feel like that's where we hit a home run in the clinic, is not being pigeonholed to just restoring mobility through adjusting your soft tissue, or, you know, giving somebody some core work for stability. You really have to kind of bridge the gap and know when the body is deficient in neurologic control, which is a hard thing to do because it's a hard thing to test sometimes. Common injuries, we're not going to talk about injuries really. In my opinion, there are a lot of great people in Birmingham to treat injuries. We talk about it all the time. We're talking about performance. We're not talking about injury care. And honestly, if you're working on performance, you should be prehabbing for injury, right? Trying to maximize your body, which is going to fight against injury. Really common ones, I'm sure if you're a runner, you've dealt with one of these or multiple of these throughout your career. But when you look at injuries, it's never just the feet. Like I said, you got to look upstream and downstream. If if you got plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, whatever it is, don't just focus on that area. And if you are, you're really missing it, and you might get it better. You might just go in there and do some stretches and some mobilizations that you saw on TV or on the internet or whatever, but it might take a really long time. And we're all about getting back out there and running, and we know we're going to be running when we're hurt, so we try to maximize time, and that's what getting really efficient in your self-care will make you a better runner, but it also makes you get through stuff a lot quicker. Okay, so let's start talking about the fun stuff. Let's talk about the gait itself, and we're going to start with the hot button terms, pronation, supination. If anybody doesn't know, supination is your rigid foot, so that's a high arch. That's where we're going with. If we look at the heel from this standpoint, the heel is going to kind of lock in inversion. The heel locks in here. We start to kind of get a little bit of this inversion right here. The rest of the foot's going to get rigid. This is where we get that high arch feel. So that's supination in a broad stroke sense. We're not going to go into the details. A lot of joints, a lot of muscles, tendon, a lot going on besides supination, pronation when we have that mechanism. And then on the other side of supination is pronation. And I don't know how many times as a runner people tell me in the clinic, or you go somewhere and you listen about overpronation, hyperpronation, and all the problems it causes. Well, and I have people all the time, I don't know if anybody's ever said this, but I'm a pronator. Well, you should get a high five because you need to pronate, right? You have to pronate to go through your gait cycle normally and to be able to dampen load. If I run with a completely supinated foot the whole time and I'm in, say, a stability shoe, so I put a big old calcaneal bar in here, or a navicular bar right in here, and I'm going to run in a stability shoe, but I have a pretty mobile foot, it's pretty normal. It's like putting a jackhammer in my foot. So I'm supposed to go through pronation to dampen the load when I hit the ground. And that's one part of the load dampening mechanism, but that's a big one. So I get really, really tired of people, I'm an overpronator, I'm a stability shoe, or I got this orthotic built. Maybe that is an issue, but it has to be pretty severe to be the only one. And again, it's not just the foot. Even if you do have an overpronation issue, whether it's dealing with posterior tibial tendon or whatever it is, it's not just the foot, it never is. And it's never just one thing. So pronation, supination, when does that occur? So if I'm going through the gait cycle here, and I guess I should have got taller box, as I go through kind of toe off, my foot immediately goes into a supinated position. So it's going to go into the closed pack position. It does this for a couple of reasons. It's most mechanically sound because it kind of shortens the lever so I can swing a shorter lever back. It also does that to protect itself. This closed pack position means that all the joints are as close together as they're going to get in my foot. All the muscles are kind of pulling everything together. So say I was to fall, my foot's a lot safer than being kind of plantar flexed and pronated, where it's just kind of in this loose, kind of ultimately stretched position on a lot of the muscles. Does that make sense? So supination is kind of immediately from toe off, swing phase. As soon as I hit, and we'll talk about where you're going to hit, heel, midfoot, forefoot, I immediately start going into pronation. A lot of things happen with that. Midfoot pronation occurs at the midfoot, right here. We also have calcaneal eversion now. So we had inversion with supination, we have eversion with pronation. Calcaneal eversion is one of the things that I feel like if you know how to fix this well as a medical guy or gal, you're going to get a lot of people well as a runner. Because this is missing in a lot of people, and a lot has to do with shoes. Our shoes keep us, you look at the bottom of your shoe, it keeps you in an inverted position there of your calcaneus, and it's also keeping you in somewhat supinated position, even in a pretty minimalist shoe like this. Does that kind of make sense? So we get stuck in the shoe all day, and then we're going to walk without being able to evert, and then we're going to go out and put on our race spikes or our cross-country shoes that have a lot of mobility. This thing's not going anywhere. It's adapted to being very, very stiff and in somewhat of an inverted position. And that's really where, it depends where you're hitting on your foot, but this is really where pronation starts, is calcaneal eversion. But this is missed with a lot of people, and we're going to show you a drill later to be working on this. Because I guarantee you, unless you're a very, very mobile person from a college and matrix standpoint, that you're going to be kind of locked up in here if you're a heavy-duty runner, especially if you're on roads. Any questions about that? We'll be tying all these together.
Well, let me ask you about, you said the shoes. Now, you go to New Balance.
Yep.
We have found certain shoes that his feet feel the best in.
Yeah. Go with it. Yeah. I mean, there's certain things for certain shoes for certain things. New Balance is really good because it has what's called a neutral heel counter. The heel counter on the back is really straight up and down, so if you have issues like Achilles tendonitis or those kind of pump bumps on the back of your Achilles, we always tell people to find a neutral heel counter so you're not tugging on that thing over and over. So there are shoes for certain situations, but that shoe's not fixing that issue, it's just not making it worse. Does that make sense? So yeah, comfort overall, and yeah. And the only thing I'm gonna say about that, when you go to a running shoe store, like Track Shack's great because they really do understand this stuff. If you go to some running shoe stores and they watch you walk for 5 minutes, they haven't felt anything or looked at anything dynamically. I mean, again, if it's based on comfort, you take that gait analysis out of the equation. But if they're basing it on how you walk, who's to say that that shoe is going to do anything when you go to take off to run, right? So you really got to kind of throw that out with the bathwater. Not a big fan of that.
What does the wear on the sole indicate?
When somebody looks at it, so like we said, you should go, and we'll talk about foot form and foot fall later. But they're always looking to see if kind of the wear pattern starts back here, like you can see where the Nikes build up, because you should be hitting your heel, which is immediately going to knock you into that nice pretty E version we talked about, which kind of takes the foot through pronation, where you see the other build up from toe off. So they want to see this kind of diagonal line. That's what most people are looking at with shoes. If you see really high level runners, it's never going to be the same. So you have to analyze everything. Like I look at everything: walk, run, movement, breathing, shoe, you know, what your girlfriend or wife looks like. I mean, that's going to affect how you run for sure. so yeah, you got to look at everything. And I put this up here, and we'll have to explain this a little bit. So obviously you're looking at the back of somebody's feet. So there are different places where you get pronation, like I said, and this is what we call a valgus ankle load. So pronation, when somebody says you're an overpronator, what you should ask them is, where do I overpronate? Where do I hyperpronate? It's forward momentum, and then we have to recreate it, so it's really taxing, which would also mean we're not using our soft tissues, that soft tissue resiliency that I was talking about. And you'll understand why, as I get into this, why I say there's not really a debate. Midfoot and forefoot for all runners is actually the best way biomechanically to dampen load and wind up the soft tissues to move you forward. Now, if you're running a 12-minute pace in a 100-mile race, are you going to forefoot strike? I highly doubt it, especially after 20, 30 miles in. Highly doubt it. But again, just like you brought up, Jeff, with the shoes, it's an accommodation factor. You have to train, and this is where you get into the debate of training. Short interval training at higher speeds versus max volume kind of training, you have to have both because your body has to accommodate to both. And it comes from a fatigue adaptation model. All sorts of things go into that factor. But we'll talk about kind of where foot placement should be from a drills standpoint here pretty soon. So ankle dorsiflexion. And I brought up foot fall because that has a lot to do with how your foot is going to fall. If you can't dorsiflex, you're not going to be able to be a forefoot striker. You can, but you're going to look really awkward. Does that make sense? If you can't dorsiflex and I go to forefoot, I'm going to look like Shaggy off Scooby-Doo because my knee flexion is going to be so quick to get myself back out of dorsiflexion and plantar flex really quick. So you're going to have a lot of turnover with not a lot of forward movement. And I put the ski jumper up here because if you want to see somebody maximize dorsiflexion, it's these guys. And when we talk about maximizing dorsiflexion, we have to talk about forward lean in the running gait. And this is, everybody talks about this, whether you're a sprint athlete or a long distance athlete. To maximize kind of forward lean to allow gravity to assist us to its fullest benefit, 5 degrees. And I'm sure everybody's heard that. 5 degrees is the max. You go over 5 degrees, you're actually putting too much stress on the posterior chain to where you're actually having to hold yourself up a little bit instead of letting yourself fall forward. Any less than 5 degrees and you're actually fighting against gravity. Does that make sense? So you're if you've ever seen somebody that's dogged and running like this and it's almost like they're in lumbar extension and back, they're not letting gravity help them. But they're also not putting themselves in a great position to be like a midfoot or forefoot striker either. So it's almost impossible, unless you're doing something funky way back here or whatever, to run like this and be midfoot. You're going to see people reaching out, and this when they're dogged. That also comes from a center of gravity standpoint. So 5 degrees of lean. That's an easy one. Not a whole lot of debate. You only need 30 degrees of dorsiflexion. Why do you need 30 degrees if you only need 5 degrees of lean? Because if I'm going to hit the ground, that 5 degrees has gone really quick. I have to suck that up into my ankle, into my knee, and my hip, so I don't just hit the ground and all of that shot comes up. So that's where that 30 degrees and winding the tissue up to push you forward comes from. And you can see distance athlete, if you look at sprinters and really elite distance athletes, sometimes marathoners get out of it a little bit, the same exact lean. In the bulk of the race. Start of a sprint, obviously they're leaning way more. But if you looked at like Ryan Hall side by side with like Usain Bolt when they're at top speed, they're going to look almost identical with lean factor. This is my public service announcement, because we're not going to talk about the knee, and we're not really going to talk about the fibula and tibia a lot. My nephew sat like this for a long time, and my sister, of course, didn't listen to her little brother, because why would she? But now he has what they call tibial torsion, or kind of an inward turning of the feet. But when you assess him and you examine him, and he didn't get put in any kind of corrective braces or anything, he actually has what's called anteversion of the pelvis. So kid sits like this, pelvis starts to accommodate, starts to turn in. So don't let your kid sit like this. This is kind of my off-topical ADD moment, but don't let your kid sit like that. And I bring that up because when I Google tibial torsion, because the tibia rotates as we go through this kind of plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, and we go through pronation, the tibia needs to rotate anywhere from 3 to 5 degrees internally. So everybody understand that? As I start to pronate, so my foot's turning in, my tibia is on top of it, and it's going to internally rotate, which drives the knee, and then the femur to internally rotate. My leg should stay in internal rotation until I get out of extension. And then it starts to go back to neutral with slight external rotation before I go back to hitting my foot on the ground. So internal rotation, extension, tiny bit of neutral, maybe external rotation on swing. Talk more about hip in the next clinic. Don't let your kids sit like that. Okay, so we've talked about all this soft tissue stuff. Soft tissue, resiliency, everything about it. How do we maximize it? I have to admit, I've learned about this for years. I didn't know what a windlass was. I'm really embarrassed about it. But windlass is a double-handled, basically, pulley. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But the windlass mechanism is where you're winding up the plantar fascia passively to use that as kind of a rubber band to shoot you forward. So it makes a lot of sense that it's called a windlass. Now, how we do that is basically utilizing the stretch shortening cycle over soft tissues. So soft tissues consist of muscles, tendons, ligaments. You have one of these strongest and biggest ligaments in your body, or tendon, sorry, your Achilles tendon that goes into your heel. Kind of cool thing that you need to know about the Achilles tendon, it takes a complete 180 before it attaches into your heel. Why is that important to know? So as we run, what did I just say? You hit the ground, and when I start to pronate, I'm getting kind of rotation in with my foot, internal rotation at the tibia, internal rotation here. That Achilles tendon rotates 180 degrees. So we always talk about torque, kind of torque linear release with the runner. They want to torque everything up to move forward. It's not so much a push as it is digging into the ground and then releasing that energy. So the Achilles tendon, or morphologically the way we formed, is really, really smart, because as we land, we maximize torque by rotating the opposite way that Achilles tendon turns. So it winds that thing up and lets it go. So it's not just this kind of winding everything up around your heel, the plantar fascia and everything. It's also twisting at the same time. So if we were trying to maximize energy, we want to move in all three directions and then let it go. Does that make sense? It's really cool when you think about it like that. And this is easy to understand. Pre-activation of the stretch shortening cycle would be in swing phase when the foot's off the ground. Stretch cycle would be as we hit the ground and we go into big toe dorsiflexion, and then we go into ankle dorsiflexion. We're winding up all these tendons and ligaments, the plantar fascia, and then as soon as that foot lets go, it propels us forward. The more that you can maximize that, the less you have to muscle through it, and the better off you're going to be. You're also going to be faster, not just more economical as a runner. Okay. I just like this picture, honestly. It was my color, my numbers for the week. But that's Goldilocks. So if we're going to talk about soft tissue resiliency, you have to talk about the Goldilocks zone. I didn't know. I learned all sorts of stuff putting this together. Does anybody know where the Goldilocks zone comes from? Okay, it's an astrophysics term for a planet that lives in the, or is in the star's livable range. So the Earth is in the Goldilocks zone of the sun. There you go. You learned something else. You can go home now. Great. Goldilocks zone. I'm talking about tendons and ligaments, though, and muscles for that fact. I call it Goldilocks zone because we have to have a muscle that is both pliable and resilient. If you have too much of one or the other, you're not going to be that great of a runner, or an athlete for that matter. And how that affects running specifically is pure running and speed comes down to stride length versus stride rate. And that's really easy to understand. What your turnover is versus how long you're reaching each time that foot is going to turn over. And all runners know this, or we've all heard it should be 120 paces, per minute, whatever it is. I don't really care about that, because again, there's different body sizes and types and everything. What I do care about is how this is affected through the soft tissue, through the past resiliency. So if I have to work really hard because I'm overstriding and I put on the braking mechanism, there's no way I'm getting into my soft tissue at all. I'm making my soft tissue work against me first and then for me. So they're getting taxed on both sides. So I always want to be using my lean, using any forward momentum that I can, winding up my soft tissues, which is therefore going to increase my stride rate. It might decrease your stride length. I don't know. There's a huge debate about stride length and if that's kind of an innate thing. They say that you should just let a runner go out and find their stride length. You can affect stride rate through kind of the pull mechanism, forward lean, all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it affects speed. That's what performance, is kind of about. So I just put in there, should you change it? We had a really good instructor that was talking about Usain Bolt and kind of if you took him on a biomechanics assessment, he has a lot of kind of differences right to left. Well, he's a curve runner, right? 200 is his event. So when you look at him from just a mechanical, symmetrical standpoint, from a doctor, you didn't know he's a sprinter, would you go in there and change it? If you did, you might mess a lot of stuff up. That goes for any type of athlete. So if I look at you on video, if we do a lot of video gait analysis, and I say, man, your stride rate or stride length's way too long, or it's way too short, I could mess with that, and it would just, it could screw you up. So that's why you have to look at the whole picture, right? And if I'm gonna change something, you're sure shooting that I'm gonna assess it first. You're gonna get sick of me saying that. And that's why we put those cards on your guys' packet. I think, whether it's me or somebody else, there's a lot of great people, a lot better people than me at assessing gait and movement. It's really hard to be objective, especially when you want to be good at something and keep doing it no matter what. And it's really also hard. Maybe you get a selfie stick in every GoPro and do your own gait analysis, but that's a whole nother issue there. But I think this is honestly invaluable. If you have a good assessment, it doesn't even mean that you need treatment, but you have to know what's wrong before you're going to fix it, right? So if it's not just the foot, it might be something else. How are you going to find that out? Maybe you come up with a clever way to find this, self-assessment. Go sell it, because nobody has that. Saw the 3 bears and Goldilocks thing, so I got to tie them back in somehow. The 3 bears of movement really breaks down to mobility, stability, and neurologic control. Now, mobility is just full active passive range of motion. Stability is being able to control those full range of motion. Neurologic control is being able to take those two, put them all together, have balance, coordination, have precision movement skills. How we work on all those things in the farm is what we call kind of a ripple system. And I just look at it like the ripple effect in a pond. So I throw a little pebble in, I'm going to have a mass effect by affecting one little part. We try to not just go in there and teach you how to foam roll or do a single leg deadlift, whatever it is. You have to go through in a systematic way to make sure that you're going to fix the issue. If I go foam roll, and Sloan came up with this, it's like giving somebody the keys of a Ferrari and not teach them how to drive. I've really changed how that muscle is reacting to my body, but I didn't change anything about the way I'm going to move. So if you're looking to have change, you have to kind of go through this whole spectrum, this whole protocol. And there's other protocols out there, but just in some way or fashion, you have to go through something like this. The days of just foam rolling and stretching and blindly going about or pain spots are kind of done because the knowledge base is huge. And there's a lot of really good people out there, so utilize whoever you know as well. And then on our website, there's that meds page that has hundreds of videos, tons of stuff, and it's all free. Go use that stuff. Again, bad business model, right? But go use them. So mobility, we're going to actually be showing you some stuff now, and I'm probably going to have Sloan come up. She was a gymnast, so she spent a ton of time barefoot. From the time she was a little kid all the way up training. You want to talk about good neurologic control through her feet? Way better. So if that's not proof that spending time in shoes and as a football player, hard cleats, hard bottom cleats, I mean that stuff is terrible. Why do you think so many football players get turf toe? Stick them in a really hard cleat, and then we get a down lineman that's going to go into full dorsiflexion and then blast off at another down lineman. I mean, it's just a ton of force. So mobility, we talked about big toe dorsiflexion, how important that is. So how are you going to fix that? Well, one of the easiest ways, Sloan, if you want to grab one of those balance pads in there. One of the easiest ways, and it seems really kind of no-brainer, is first of all, if we're going through that ripple system, we have to affect the soft tissues around the big toe. So that's really the plantar fascia, kind of tendons, ligaments, and muscles that are tying into that big toe and flex and extend it. But if we want to fix dorsiflexion, we have to get it into dorsiflexion, and this is one of the best ways that we found. If you want to stand up for the rest of this and come up here, I know it's not the most comfortable thing, but I think a lot of the stuff you're going to want to see. We are a big proponent of dynamic mobilization, so that's pairing proper joint movement, proper joint centration with dynamic movement around that joint. So if you go in there and static stretch something and we don't even know, first of all, if the joint's in the right position, we might really be spitting in the wind. So with this little deal right here, first of all, you need to see how much toe dorsiflexion you have. And ideally, you would be able to get the ball of your foot to the floor, which Sloan can. You can see this one's a little more limited than this guy. So she is literally now going to stand up using her big toe or come up on her big toe. So that's our active load. That's a concentric load of everything that goes into the big toe. And then she's literally just going to sit down. You might say, I came to a clinic for that. Yeah, but where are you doing this? Do you have a problem with your big toe? The other thing is you can be too aggressive with things like this. If you have 20 degrees of big toe dorsiflexion, you try to do something like this, you're probably going to cause a problem. So start with things like using a lacrosse ball to roll the bottom of your foot. Find somebody who does, manual care, whatever it is that can get in there, or just gently start working in dorsiflexion. This by far is the best. You can have a change in an athlete in a day just by working on this, because you're working on passive loading, eccentric loading as she sits back down, which is a very powerful tool, and then she's putting that joint in a good position. I'll tell you one other tidbit here though. Sometimes you can get a joint, like I said, that's not centrated or doesn't move quite right. So if I actually have a little kind of impingement here of this joint and it's not allowing it to kind of slide, because this actually needs to kind of flex and then glide over this. If you do this, you're actually going to wind these tissues up too much because you're not actually getting the joint to move. We're just stretching these a lot and kind of trying to force it. So that's where we use things like, you'll see us use bands on our ankles and things like that, because you sometimes have to put the joint in the right position and then move around it. And again, that all goes back to the assessment. I would never just say, go do this drill. I haven't even looked at you, because it might hurt you or it might not do anything, and either way I look bad. Big toe dorsiflexion, big deal. The way you can test it is pull your big toe up, that's passive, and actively bring your big toe up 60 degrees. If you got a 6 iron at home, the lie angle on a 6 iron is 60 degrees. So use that, that's your measurement tool. Dorsiflexion, I put plus supination and pronation. So if you've ever come to see me for any injury or ever heard me talk, if you haven't heard triplanar ankle mobilization, you should slap me in the face, because I don't know how many times I've said it. The reason we use this drill though is because it is the best thing to dynamically stretch passive tissues, the muscle, mobilize the midfoot, the ankle, the mortise joint, all of those. And really, I'm going to show you first how we kind of test dorsiflexion.
Yeah.
Mine. So I'll use my leg.
My big toe dorsiflexion may be good, but my
Yeah. So now she's just going to leave her heel down and try to touch. So I did a hand width, and you can see how limited she is. So her squat, not the greatest in the world. If we watch her run, she's like, first of all, we did a video of her this morning, and she takes off, she's running at the vault still when she starts running. But then she's a prancer, so she stays in a lot more plantar flexion than she should, and she also rocks her calves up. Calves and hip flexors, which we won't talk about a lot. We will a little bit why. But dorsiflexion, supination, so you want to use that wall?
Yeah.
I'll be your baby here in a second. So what Sloan is doing is putting the foot that she's going to work on forward, and now she is simply going knee over foot straight, knee over foot out to the side, and knee over foot to the inside. But she's keeping the heel locked, and she's not letting her foot rock side to side either. Now what she's doing, again, as she spins into, so if she goes knee in, that's pronation with dorsiflexion. She goes knee out, that's supination, so you're going to see her arch get a little bigger, and straight ahead would be pure dorsiflexion. You need all three of those movements. One more that we've kind of added is kind of that mortar and pestle grind. So she goes forward and she stays in dorsiflexion and grinds across that mortise joint. It's called a mortise joint for a reason. That's literally how it works, like a mortar and pestle. So you need some kind of rotation in there. If she does this and she's done it for a month or whatever and it's still not getting better, maybe the joints in there aren't acting quite right. And we'll talk about this on the next one a little bit too. But I'm going to be her kind of band post. Put your foot through here. Sometimes, if anybody's familiar with like a mulligan technique, a mobilization, it's all about putting the joint in the right position and moving it around. So here we're pulling the tibia, or your leg bone, back on the ankle, So sometimes we allow the ankle to move into more dorsiflexion as that tibia is kind of rocked back. And I tell people to play with this. So sometimes you need to have the band going from front to back. So if I'm up here, so turn around facing me. So she might want to do it like this, because who knows why, this would be a rarity, but you need some kind of forward tibial shift. I doubt that's going to be the case, but if you've ever had like anterior compartment syndrome, anterior tib issues, that might be the case. But that, again, it comes down, you can self-assess that. You could get next to a wall and basically say, all right, I'm going to go a hand width away from the wall. Can I leave my heel on the ground and touch the wall? If you can't, you got a problem, right? I mean, it's simple as that. That's as simple as that. Now, what is the problem? A little more exploring to figure that out. Okay, this last one, you see fibular glide with calcaneal eversion. So I said eversion is one of the biggest deals for a runner. So I'm going to show this on this model first. So this is 2 tennis balls taped up right here. You'll get a love right here is kind of my chiropractic education, right? So a couple balls in this and foam roller, you can go do whatever you want to do. Yeah, that's a bad joke. But 2 tennis balls taped together. The reason we use this is if we have the fibula right here, sometimes we need this fibula to move back because we got to make room for this talus to kind of drive through here. So think about it like this. If I have these 2 knuckles, your medial and lateral malleolus, they need to split apart a little bit to allow that foot to dorsiflex. And a lot of people, they don't, for a lot of different reasons. So what you'll see a lot of practitioners do is grab this fibula, move it back, and then they manually get in here and dorsiflex that thing. Well, again, bad business model, you can do it on your own. So 2 tennis balls, you get this space right here and you trap that fibula. Now you're going to angle it so this ball, the bottom one, is right in this pocket, right behind or in front of your Achilles, right behind that malleolus, right like this. I do it on the ground usually. Do it up here so we can see. You're going to trap that foot in there. Now what you have to do is you have to give a little bit of a forward push. This is why we don't use a lacrosse ball, because you need something softer to kind of catch your fibula so it can kind of go into it. Give a little bit of anterior pressure. You take yourself into full dorsiflexion, and now you're literally going to use the bottom ball to mobilize into eversion. Now at the end of the day, just like I said with the ripple system, mobility is not the end, it's not the end goal most of the time. If you don't tell your body how to use this, which we're going to talk about in a second, you're not doing a whole lot. If I say, man, I'm getting a ton of eversion, I'm going to go put my inverted Nikes back on and go run 10 miles on the road with the exact same mechanics, you'd probably take a shoe off and feel the exact same foot. So if you want to see real change, you have to use some sort of a system. Everybody getting that? Okay, so again, anterior pressure on the fibula, full dorsiflexion, grab the heel. You're literally trying to push that heel down. And if we went around and tested, a lot of people, you're going to see that we don't have a whole lot of that eversion mechanism, which is a big load dampener, very, very important. Any questions on either one of those? Need at least 2 minutes to make change. So from like it's called hysteresis. It's kind of what your tendons and ligaments do when they change. They go under what's called creep, or they get longer or shorter. You need at least 2 minutes to have a morphological change of any structure like that. So if you're doing like 30 seconds of foam rolling and it hurts so bad on my quads, you're not doing much but hurting yourself a little bit and then going out and running. So give yourself time. If you could give yourself 10 minutes, 2 different parts of the day, that would be plenty to have a lot of change in 2 weeks, so long as you know what problem you're working on. Last little thing about mobility, and we'll move on. Positive performance adaptation window. So if you go do a really taxing workout, so I go do 800 repeats, or I go lift weights, or I do whatever, your body, especially with running puts a lot of vibration into the body. So vibration tries to stiffen muscles and stiffen soft tissue structures. It's also very demanding to go run on the road. If you do that, your body is, after you do an activity, it's basically like applauding the brain. It's saying, congratulations for doing such a hard activity. And it's going to say, now we're going to adapt to the way that you just trained me. So I'm going to adapt really stiff. If I ran in an elevated heel shoe, I'm going to adapt short. So you have a kind of finite window that's dictated by how intense the activity of your workout was, or how long the activity of your workout was. Let's say I go run a 100-miler, I probably got a couple days to work on mobility where I'm still able to soak that stuff up. Because I put a lot of kind of input and neuromodulation in there. If I go do 800 repeats for 20, 30 minutes, I probably have like 10, 15 minutes to go work on mobility stuff to keep my general mobility, but also be seeing headway if I'm working on issues. So that's a big, big point that I try to get across to all our athletes. So now stability.